Hello, I'm back. I'm eating oatmeal. Today we're not going to be talking about the cardboard calculator. I've been a little bit preoccupied with a new idea. That idea, I've called it in the past R theta, but it would be a more accurate description to call it R-NULL. It wouldn't even make sense for me to talk about why I've named it that until after I finished. So I'll do that then. So what is the idea R theta? R theta is actually quite simple. Here we are again, where we're here yet again. I haven't erased anything from this, but we gotta use the other side for something, you know? Okay, so this is the basic idea. We have a certain statement that we have a measurable value A and we measure it to be B. Now here is the thing. Solipsism tells us that we can't be sure about anything. Anything has uncertainty, right? To more formalize this, imagine any statement you want. It can be as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. Now here's the thing. We like to think that it's true, but you can imagine a universe that looks exactly like ours, with the exact same Earth, the exact same people, and yet for whatever reason, it simply is not true. Now you might ask, that's kind of stupid. Are you implying that 1 + 1 does not equal 2? Just because these two universes could exist? What does this even mean? The idea is this. At any given time, we perceive the world to be a certain way. And there are actually an infinite number of worlds that look the exact same as ours, but they have some hidden characteristic that we cannot observe. The idea here is that for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. If you can imagine a universe that looks the exact same as ours, but simply whatever you're saying is not true, then you can't assume that it's true. It could be false. So the idea of A = B must be modified. Here, you're getting a little bit of glare. The idea of A = B must be modified. Why is this backwards? Whatever. I'll fix that in post. This must be modified. So what we essentially say is A = B plus omega, where omega is essentially our error, how far we are from the truth. But here's the problem. You see, omega actually equals A minus B, but that sort of implies omega is also a quantity that can change, because you see, everything is uncertain is also a statement, which is also uncertain. And so, it's not just omega. Omega must have an additional uncertainty. I just called omega sub 1. So if we rearrange the initial equation, we get A = B plus omega minus omega sub 1. This pattern continues, so it would be plus omega sub 2 minus omega sub 3. That just goes on and on for infinity. But wait, that's also a statement. We cannot say that it goes on and on forever. What does this leave us with? Well, it leaves us with a weird idea. Essentially, if we treat this infinite series of omegas, I'll just start at 0, of omegas, as a function itself, I have called it, don't mess that up, I have called it lambda, just because, then we can say that lambda is essentially a function which acts on a statement. You don't got to know exactly what that means, just imagine a function f of a certain thing, in this case it's A = B, which will output an infinite series. Now, here's the thing. Like I said before, how do we know this goes on and on forever? This also has its own uncertainty. What that means is you can apply the function again. What the crud does this mean? Because remember, the original value that we got is essentially getting us to the real value, what is supposed to be real and physical, apart from what we observe. The simple illusion of physicality that we think A equals B. The answer is, well, both are physical, both are real. They just aren't completely real, because we can keep doing this again. F of f of f. F of f of f of f. Now, what does each one of these mean? This is where our theta gets interesting, because what we find is that we can essentially separate this into different categories. So what we found is that lambda equals some function, and this function can be repeated and it has to mean something. So what do we say it means? Well, none of these levels must actually be physical, although they must have a direction which directs towards physicality, which also implies they have another direction. Essentially, we can treat this as a sort of meta-dimension. A dimension comprised of other dimensions, although I'll get to that in a bit, in which one end of it, one direction, is associated with reality, and the other direction is associated with unreality? So our first clue is in examining the zero case, essentially when we have applied no f functions. If we imagine point, if we have done no f functions to it, it essentially, I'll start again. If we imagine a statement A equals B, and we've done no function to it, that a measurement A is equal to a quantity B. What that essentially is it is the union of the physical world and the metaphysical world. What I mean by that is it is essentially our senses, our perception. In the same way that any statement with regards to what we see, our perception, can be validated under the f function to see if it is real. Ew. Sorry. Anyways, what is real, this essentially acts as a dividing line. If we go one step above, I'm going to call this S1 and S0. I'll get to why I call them S in a bit. Just know that I do. We can continue to go up, but what we might find is a little bit hard to understand currently, so let's think about it. When we go up, what we're essentially doing is we're considering every possible version of reality, or essentially every copy of ourselves that feels and perceives the exact same thing, and uniting them under a singular dimension, or a singular space in which all are possible. A singular space in which one of them becomes the real reality. Essentially, it is unifying all of these possibilities into one reality. S1. What you can think about this is, at any moment, choosing between A and B essentially creates two fictitious universes. What I mean by that is we have to create two different models to describe these universes. And the unification of both of them, both branches, allows us to understand both at the same time, both A and B at the same time. So what this is essentially doing is it's unifying all of these copies of ourselves. So I will do this. Ew, that does not work. Now you might wonder, what have I just done? The answer is essentially this. We can imagine one of these as a reality. S1 is going to contain multiple instances of possible realities because it's considering all possible universes in which what we perceive is what we perceive. And so it's going to contain a larger sum. It's going to contain every universe below it. The same thing can be said to be true for this. Essentially, at any point, each one of these universes acts the exact same way in relationship to its neighbors. It comprises everything under it and is included in everything over it. But let's ask ourselves, what if we went in the opposite direction? What if we went in S-1? Well, if we simply continue this pattern, we find that this must be comprised of more universes. Now, remember, S0 is our experiences. So something comprised of multiple experiences is essentially aspects of us. You can think of it as memories or ideas or really anything comprised within our mental abstraction of the world. You can keep going further and further and further and further. And essentially the idea is that everything under this is contained within you, yourself. All of these are ideas. They just become ideas, and then ideas of ideas, ideas of ideas of ideas, so on and so forth. So, what does that mean? Well, essentially, we have created a unique structure for the universe. This is the unique structure that we have found. Now, what can we do with this? Well, what I have seem to have noticed is that time seems to have a certain directionality. Essentially, as with the order of chaos, things become more complicated and more dependent on their previous states. Essentially, how you can think of this is you are dependent on your reality, which is dependent on its reality. There seems to be a causal direction to this. Essentially, let's think of ideas. Every single idea that you have is based on either a stimuli, an idea that already existed, coming into a new idea or branching into a more abstracted idea, so on and so forth. So essentially, each one of these levels and parts of these levels seems to be connected to the higher direction. There seems to be a certain directionality. And when we consider this seems very important. Because, after all, each one of these layers contains the layers below it. And so it makes sense that it would influence them. However, this cannot influence this because they are not connected. They do not contain each other. And so it makes logical sense that they would not affect each other. If one were to change, the other would not be affected. And so, change must come from this direction. Because if it were to happen in the opposite direction, essentially going upwards, that would allow the influence of other realities, what I call back propagation. But time seems to have a certain directionality to it. And so, we have a certain model for causality. Now, there's some interesting things. The first idea is we have to remember what we're trying to do to begin with. R theta is supposed to be a universal truth, a truth that is true no matter what. And every single one of these universes, even a universe which does not exist, because again, we can imagine a universe which does not exist. Simply, and even if we can't, you can argue we can't. That's fine. Just imagine a universe in which we could imagine it. There you go. So imagine a universe in which you could imagine it. This one, go down one, and there should be a universe that doesn't exist. Kind of simple, right? Well, here is the thing. In a universe that doesn't exist, which is different from an empty universe. In an empty universe is still governed by laws. So even, in a contained universe where there is nothing, it's just black, dark, void, it still is subject to laws, just like ours is. In fact, you can simply imagine our universe devoid of anything. There are still universal truths, there's still whatever, there's still the laws of physics, they just aren't applying currently. And so even in this universe, R theta, or R-NULL as I should be calling it, still applies. But what about a universe which fundamentally does not exist? Well, the only difference between this and a universe that doesn't exist is that this still has laws. And so a universe that doesn't exist must not abide by any metaphysical structure. Here's the problem with that. Essentially what that means it is perfect unity by means of chaos. Or in other words, non-existence is pure chaos. And I'm not using that in terms of chaos theory. I'm using that to simply say it is the non-existence of a structure which does not abide by any known laws. Really, I shouldn't say known laws, any laws at all. So the idea 1 + 1 does not make sense. Now, we got to think about why I call this R-NULL. You see, R theta is interesting. Any definition you give it must be fundamentally uncertain. That's sort of the point of R theta. But if any definition is uncertain, that means R theta is a unique type of undefinition or uncertainty. It is undefinition of undefinition. That is, you literally cannot define how it is undefined. Or in other words, pure chaos. That was a little more dramatic in my head, whatever. And so, this seems to state that R theta and pure chaos are fundamentally related. Not only does R theta hold in a non-existent universe, and therefore all of omega, because we proved all other cases, it's fairly easy to prove all other cases. Not only does it hold there, in many ways, R theta is nothing. In other words, we have found an exigence for the universe. We have often asked, why is there something rather than nothing? Essentially, why are we even here? Sometimes this is brought up, as an argument for religion. Really, it's an argument for non-existence. I mean, really? Even if there was a God, why would he want to make something? Why is there something rather than nothing? Well, we just found out why. The answer is that this statement is fundamentally flawed. You see, we were assuming that we existed. The problem is, how would we know if we didn't exist? You wouldn't know if you didn't exist. Moreover, how would you feel? How would you experience when you don't exist? We like to think it's nothing. But as we've seen, nothing is only a type of nothing. It's not pure nothing. Because it's still subject to the same rules of the universe. To truly not exist, you must not care about existing. I.e., there is no difference between existing and not existing. That is pure nothing. But in that case, our reality, what we see, is no different from not existing. Or essentially, they are the same thing. And so, from something comes nothing, comes something. I want to kind of linger on that for a second. We have found why the universe exists. We have found its structure. And theoretically, if we could reverse this, we could create back propagation. And if we could travel from one universe to another, that's essentially multiverse time travel. We're reversing the flow of time and going to another universe. So, essentially, complete causal breakdown. Now, I've talked to a few people about this, and the reactions are somewhat mixed. Some believe that, this idea is ultimately fruitless, which I can understand. After all, how could we ever get information about universes which are above us, which contain things that we by definition cannot know? And furthermore, the idea that this is somehow dangerous. How I see it is, undefinition, breaking the universe, is the goal of life. At every second, of every waking second, of every moment, of every day, we are bound by reality. We are forced to live in this pen. We're bound by the physical laws of the universe and of logic, and forced to experience what I would consider, and most people would consider, a subpar reality. This should not, and fundamentally cannot, because we can simply imagine a universe, cannot be the best state of things. We are obligated to break our universe, to find somewhere else, to do something greater. I think of it like this. There is only one true freedom in the universe, and that is our theta itself. It is free from any form of logic, any form of rules, any form of anything, and is set to freely flow. How would that feel? To be spread out among the entire universe, to encompass it all, to experience it all, to be free from everything and yet be in everything. How I see it is, if there is a point to living, if living is some net positive experience, then it makes sense to keep on living. If living is inherently good, then we must break the universe. Because if we do, go from, whatever universe to another, with a different set of laws, a different set of logic, where pure, esoteric happiness, devoid of any sort of negative emotion, is just intrinsically possible, doesn't it make sense that we should fight for that? If there's a heaven, wouldn't you want to go there? So this is the first installment of R Theta. I've written a number of papers, which are really just Google Docs, talking about this. I've thought about this for a really long time, and I'm tired of thinking about it. What I mean by that is I love thinking about it. I'm just tired of only thinking about it. I've talked to a few people. The problem is people either don't want to hear it or do not understand it. I understand there's a very high chance that I'm either stupid or crazy or both. That's fine by me. I simply want to know which is which. And so by making this video, it's really more for me than for anyone watching this. I can simply have it out there and say, this is done. I did this. This exists. R theta, unequivocally, unfalsifiably exists. Not because it's unknowable, but because it's simply true. Its own untruth creates its truth. Its own nothingness creates something. Its own chaos and lack of structure creates one. And I think that's so beautiful. For all of history, we have looked for some pattern, some universal truth, something to unify everything. And that something was nothing. Nothing unifies the universe. Even that assumption was too much to assume. And I think in some way it's the most beautiful type of universe. This universe, which contains every possible universe, every possible multiverse, and so on and so forth, is the most general type of universe. And I think that's beautiful. So, if you think it's true, if you think it's not true, whatever. I just hope that one of you, that somebody, can tell me which is which. That's all. Yeah, that was the video, and I didn't really... Okay, this is gonna sound bad. I didn't really put thought into the video because I just want to get this done. I'm gonna make better ones in the future. I just want this to be out here. I've had these ideas for so long. I just want to say it. So everything today was... Ooh, I'm dark now. Was just off the top of my head. I'll go when... They're crying for me. Oh, never mind. Hey, I'm back. Yeah, so actually, while I was gone for a second, I was thinking about, you know, more rigorously proving some of this stuff. And I want to rigorously prove each one of these things and talk a little bit more about their implications, etc., just to have it out there because, again, I just want these ideas to be out and done in somewhere where they cannot get water damage on them as a piece of paper. Even a Google Doc can just be deleted, so. Dang, like this outro is gonna be more edited than the actual video. I keep getting interrupted. Anyways, yeah. I'm probably also gonna have it be better quality than a piece of paper and a whiteboard. I just did that again because I don't really care right now. I just want it to exist. Existing is, you know, the most important part of this. Whether or not it looks nice, it just has to exist first. So, see you guys.